And maybe that was naive, but we had that confidence that we were like, hey, it's okay. We'll just do this. What's the worst thing that could happen? Let's just try. And so we started to build it. We literally moved into my garage. I have a back garage, like a shed, and we turned it into a studio office. And my co-founder moved into that space. And so every day my morning commute was walking out the sliding door and crossing my yard and going into the garage.
Oh, I love this story so much. I did not know this part of the story. You're kidding.
Oh, so he literally moved in. And so like the mechanics of it, where we're like, how do we stretch out our timeline to like give ourselves the best chance of figuring something out? And he had some renters in his home, and he's like, hey, I can fully book it out, including my own room, and I can come live in your garage. So my cost of living drops to basically zero. And so he's like, so I could do this for months and maybe like a year. And I had saved up a bunch of money for this moment. I had a mortgage and a family and kids, and I knew that if I was ever going to live out my dream of doing my own thing, that I needed to have some money. And so I had, over years, had just slowly built up a little bit of savings, and it was marked as, this is our startup fund. And so we were prepared to spend all of that money, and he was prepared to live in that garage until we either figured it out or just had to go back to having, just regular jobs. And around that, so the most crazy, the craziest part about building Droplet was sitting in that garage and saying, where do we start? Right? We had incorporated the company. We used Stripe Atlas to do that. And so we had an official company that could be invested in, and we had done everything as best as we knew how. And we were just learning as we went, like how to do that. And then we got an inbound email from an accelerator fund. And they said, hey, we noticed that you changed your LinkedIn profiles. Are you guys starting something? And we're like, yes. And at this point, we had like nothing. We had nothing. We'd like just incorporated the company. We hadn't built anything. We didn't have any customers. And they're like, hey, pitch us on what your idea is, and we might give you some money and help you through our accelerator. And we're like, okay. This was something we hadn't considered. We weren't thinking we're going to go raise money. We're going to go do the VC route. And so Mike, my co-founder, put together a slideshow. In retrospect, we didn't know what we didn't know. So it was a terrible pitch. Our TAM was way too small, and our idea was not nearly ambitious enough. And we probably didn't explain it very clearly at all, because at that point, we hardly knew what it was that we were going to build. But they liked us, which it turns out in like the early days, that's actually kind of 90% of like your very early funding is just, do you like the founders and think that they've got some go-getter attitude. And so we raised a little bit of money to do like a small pre-seed round and went through their accelerator. And as part of that accelerator, we were introduced subsequently to a lot of investors, because they have a demo day, kind of like Y Combinator. And so in the meantime, the whole accelerator was, let's get your product built, let's get it to market, let's start generating revenue, so that way when demo day comes around, you have some sort of traction to show, and maybe you'll be lucky, and one of those lucky few, to get some seed funding. And for me personally, the experience was massively overwhelming. My co-founder was not particularly focused on product. He had basically just niched down into sales. And so the whole, what is this thing we're building and how is it going to work, largely fell to me. And so when I try to talk to him, like, hey, I'm kind of thinking about this builder and this thing, I could see that he wasn't interested. His eyes would kind of glaze over, and he's like looking at his watch like, I should be making calls and trying to sell this thing. And so I was like, okay, I have to just go figure this out. And that was really tricky. I think it's something that a lot of people don't talk about in the beginning. It's just this sort of the difficulty of inventing or innovating. It's that whole defining the problem and trying to be as clear about it and accurate about it as you can be, so that way you're not wandering around in the desert. So the way I found focus was I went to my co-founder and I said, hey, what does the ideal demo look like? Because we were very focused on revenue. We knew that the best kind of traction was the best kind of validation and traction was people paying us money for something. And so we knew that we were going to be demoing pretty much right out of the gate something. And he said, well, I'm going to go on those school websites and I'm going to find examples of PDFs that look particularly painful. And the PDFs are going to say the name of the person that's supposed to sign it. And I'm going to go on their directory and I'm going to find their phone number and I'm going to call them. and I'm going to say, hey, it looks like you're on this atrocious PDF. Is that a pain? Because it looks like it's a big pain. And he said, it'd be great if in that phone call, I could say, and look at what it will be like. And if we could have a version of the PDF that looked like a web form that they could just fill out. And now this would help them to bridge that gap, that imagination, help them to imagine what the future would look like. And so, okay. What kind of data do you collect on a PDF? Well, we're going to need inputs, and we're going to need drop downs, and we're going to need radio buttons. And I just started from there. I said, I'm going to build a form builder, or I'm going to build a thing that looks like a form, right? All of this is about trying to say, what's that tiniest thing that you can build that will get you over the hump and unlock that next opportunity, whether that's the funding that you need, or the revenue that you need, or the insights that you need to do the next thing. And so I didn't do a deployment process. I didn't set up AWS. I didn't get a server going. I went into a code sandbox because ultimately our customers didn't know or care the difference between a URL that said Droplet in it or one that said code sandbox. So I set up a code sandbox, and I set it up in such a way that Mike could write some HTML-like code, and it would create a demo form that had some interactivity in it. So he could click a drop down, and if he picked the other button, an other input would appear next to it. We were trying to squeeze in any sort of pizzazz into it that we could to try to make it look more than just like a really womp womp form. And so that's where we started. We started with smoke and mirrors and saying imagine what this could be. And when he would do the sales calls, I'd sit off to the side, and customers would ask hey, does it do this? Does it do that? And I would basically be out of the screen out of the view of the camera, thumbs upping and thumbs downing things that I thought I could ship in time for the customer if they bought. Right? And that's how we did it. We just sold ahead, but never we were always very conscious to not be unethical. It was never promising things. That's why I was there. I was there to say yeah, we can do this, or no, we can't. And he would reassure me, because sometimes I'd be how am I going to deliver on this promise? And he'd say, it's okay. We'll tell them that they're going to start a month from now. And now you've got 4 weeks to hack away at that thing. And we just need to clear the bar of what we promised them. And if something happens and you're doing your best and you can't figure out how to ship the thing that we promised them, he said, I'll own it. I'll go back to the customer and I'll say, hey, we thought we were going to be able to release this feature in time. We can't. We'd like to give you your money back. He's like, but I think you can do it. And I'm like, okay. Right. And I'd go in there and I'd figure it out. And it turns out I was always able to just barely stay in front of whatever we promised the customer. And so this informed our vision of what we needed to go build next. Was almost always motivated by a customer saying, hey, can it do this? Can it do that? And we didn't just blindly build it. There was always this weighing out of how reasonable is this ask? How quickly can I build it? How closely do I think it maps to a first principles solution? How closely do I think it maps to our core problem? And if it's way out here, way afield, then I would say no, even if I thought it was easy and I thought it might win the deal. Because as the product owner, I needed to make sure that we didn't end up going too far away from our core value in the early days. This is the only thing that gives you any hope of having a product that customers will understand and that they'll buy and that will work for them. You can't have too many weird exceptional cases. At least that's always been my product philosophy. You can't let dollars or potential deals pull your product too far away from your core value. And that's just me. I know there are people who are yelling right now saying that's wrong. That's where all your best insights come from. But for me, it's worked. We had a very ambitious core problem that we were trying to solve. And there were a lot of tentacles places you could take it. And so for me, I would always note, hey, they might want this. It might make sense for us to do this feature or that feature in the future. But it didn't ever pull my roadmap so far afield that it gave us crazy technical debt or complicated the product. So now it wasn't clear what we were anymore. We tried to stay true to that vision.